All right, guys, welcome back to our Cooper Book Club, Reading Between the Wines. We are still on chapter 17. Last week, we were talking about stimulus control and teaching discrimination and how to program for those things when you do become a BCBA, because that's really important that we're not just getting them to memorize and become very rote in what they are in their responding. Instead, you're actually teaching them this is an apple and this is an orange. So whenever I have the two together and I ask you which one's an apple, you're going to select the correct one, and not just because that one has a certain feature that I've just memorized and I know that whenever she asks for apple, then I look at the one that has the, I don't know, the leaf on it. And so I just know that that's an apple. So might accidentally get that faulty stimulus control. So just making sure that we have stimulus control over the correct thing that you're trying to teach. And then we're also teaching discrimination. So now we're going to go into teaching conditional discrimination. And it's going to give us an example, an experimental example from Skinner. Okay, so this one, Skinner procedure. Okay, so pigeon was presented with 3 horizontal keys to peck. The middle key was illuminated with a color to start the trial. A peck on the illuminated key turned it off and lighted the two side keys. One of the side keys was the same color as the sample color, illuminated in the middle. A peck on the side key with the same color as the sample key produced reinforcement. Error responses were not reinforced. So remember last time how we talked about how when teaching discrimination, you are kind of using extinction and differential reinforcement. So what is it, a pigeon? The pigeon is only going to get reinforcement when he matches the correct colors with the color in the middle. And then if he picks on the one that's incorrect, he's not going to get his treat. And after a while, he'll start to realize, oh, okay, he wants me to pick the one with the same color. And so then that becomes the SD for reinforcement. And then the other key is going to become your S delta. So the S delta is signaling that reinforcement is not available. Okay, so 3-term contingency, conditional discrimination, the color of the middle. So they're teaching match to sample to a pigeon in a lab to prove that this stuff works, which you guys are going to be using for your clients when you do become a BCBA. So the color of the middle key is the conditional stimulus. The 3-term contingency is effective only when it matches the sample stimulus. Reinforcement is conditional on the context of discriminative stimuli other than the SD. Okay, and so then it comes under contextual control. Conditional discrimination operates at the level of a 4-term contingency. Okay, so conditional sample is going to be your SD, and that's going to trigger some type of response. And that response, as a consequence, is going to get reinforcement. So in this scenario, whenever the pigeon would match the key with the same color as the middle, he would get a grain. His S delta is going to be the other key that was a different color than the middle key. To start a matching to sample trial, the participant will make a response called the observing response to present the sample stimulus. the conditional sample. The comparison stimuli, discriminative events, are presented usually after removing the sample, but not always, and provide for an effective three-term contingency and other non-effective three-term contingencies. One comparison stimulus will match the conditional sample. A response that selects the matched comparison and rejects the non-matched comparison will produce reinforcement. So on the figure below, it's going to present an example of the observing response, the conditional sample, the discriminative events, and the comparison match. Okay, so let's look at this situation here. Okay, so this is what they're presenting. So basically, this is your SD. And so in this situation, it's in number 2. So that's going to be your conditional sample. And then these are your discriminative events. So he's going to have to pick out of these 4 choices to determine which one is the SD. So which one is going to get me reinforcement? Which one is going to make my teacher so happy? And she says, yay, good job, and gives me a high five. And then which ones do not. So in this situation, if he would select the 4, it would not get reinforcement. So that's an S delta. If he selects 1, it's not going to get reinforcement. If he selects 3, it's not going to get reinforcement. But if he selects 2, which is the comparison match, he's going to get access to that reinforcement. So depending on what it is, praise, what are those little fishes that they love? Fish cracker.
Goldfish.
Yes, goldfish. Oh my gosh, my brain, my pregnant brain. Okay, so teaching concepts, and I think it's going to go into prompting and the different types of error correction. So intervention, right? There's different types of intervention and different ways to teach a response. So depending on your learner, what you're teaching, you're the one that's going to determine what teaching method they're going to use in order for them to properly grasp the concept that you're trying to teach. Okay, well, this stuff has been pretty simple, pretty basic. We get it. Does anybody have any questions so far? Somebody is messaging in the chat. If somebody can look at the Facebook chat and tell Olga that we're on, she's asking. Okay, so teaching concepts. A concept is defined by a set of shared features found in each example of the concept. Every example of a concept shares certain must-have features with all other examples of the concept. In addition to these must-have features, the examples have other can-have features, which other examples of the concept may or may not have. Thus, the shared must-have features are what define something as an example of a concept and do not change from example to example. Okay, so terms such as concept formation or concept acquisition imply for many people some hypothetical construct or mental process. Yet acquiring a concept is clearly dependent on responses in the presence of antecedent stimuli and the consequences following those responses. Okay, so it's important that we know the concept formation. And its process has to do with that SD being that stimulus that is going to give them access to reinforcement or not. So distinguish examples of the concept from similar non-examples that lack one or more of the defining must-have features is going to be discrimination. Oh, these seem important because somebody highlighted them. So I'll say it again. Distinguish examples of the concept from similar non-examples that lack one or more of the defining must-have features is going to be discrimination. Identify examples of the concept across a wide range of varying examples that include non-defining can have features is going to be your stimulus generalization. So concept formation is a behavioral outcome of stimulus generalization and discrimination. So that concept formation is basically like your ultimate goal, right? Because we want them to be able to generalize, and so concept formation is going to be your ultimate outcome that you want. Now they're able to discriminate which one is the apple when I ask what is an apple, but they're also able to look at other apples and know that they are apples if they're in 3D, 2D, no matter what kind of apple. They have now generalized across all different kinds of apples. So that will be your concept formation. Hold on, I'm letting some people in. Okay. Discrimination training is fundamental to teaching conceptual behavior. Antecedent stimuli representative of a group of stimuli sharing common relationship. The antecedent stimuli from the other stimulus class must be presented. So discrimination training, we're using it always and we don't even realize it. Okay, now it's going to go into stimulus class. Okay, this is fun. Stimuli that make up a class may function within feature stimulus class, arbitrary stimulus class, and arbitrary stimulus class. So stimuli in a feature stimulus class share common physical forms. So they look similar. So that one's easy to remember, right? Feature is how something looks. So they share common physical forms. So those are going to be your feature stimulus class. And you guys are going to need to know the difference between those. So feature stimulus classes include an infinite number of stimuli and constitute a large portion of our conceptual behavior. For instance, the concept dog is based on a feature stimulus class. The common physical forms of all dogs will be members of that stimulus class. Okay, so you guys know that dogs have many different breeds, but because it looks a certain way, we know that it's a dog. So all those different Boxer, Doberman, Lab, they all share some common type of feature. So they are all in a feature stimulus class. Okay, so a young child through differential reinforcement will learn to differentiate dogs from horses, cats, cows, and so on. Physical forms provide common relations in many feature stimulus classes, such as stimulus classes that evoke the response book, table, house, tree, cup, cat, rug, onion, and car. Okay, a relational or relative relation exists among stimuli and other feature classes. Example of these feature stimulus classes based on relative. Hold on, more people. Wow, we have a big group today. Okay, so share common feature. That's basically, to sum it up, feature stimulus class, they all share some type of common feature. Okay, let's talk about arbitrary stimulus class. So they evoke the same response, but they do not share a common stimulus feature. Example, they do not resemble each other in physical form, nor do they share a relationship. For example, a teacher could form an arbitrary stimulus class by using 50%, half, divided evenly, or 0.5, and a shaded circle. Following training, each of these stimuli of different physical forms will evoke the same response. Okay, they all mean half, but they don't share the same physical features. So they don't look alike, but they all mean the same thing. So those are going to be your arbitrary stimulus class. Okay, so since these are very important and you guys need to know the difference, do you guys want to try to give an example? Cooper gave us an example of different dogs being in a feature stimulus class. Does anybody else have an example that they can share with us?
Would apples maybe like be a feature stimulus class in the sense of like you have green, you have yellow, you have red, you have maybe some that are like reddish green?
Yeah, that's a good one. So you have, especially for like apple snobs like me, I'm a pink lady type of girl, but
Right.
they're all different, right? But they're all apples. So they do, that's a perfect example. So they're all sharing the same common features. So I know these are apples, but I specifically only like pink ladies or the Honey Crisp or Gala, whatever. So they're all apples sharing same features. Perfect. Anybody else? I guess cats can do the same thing. Oh, what about wine? That's what our whole group is about,
I
right?
was about to say also dogs.
Yeah, so Cooper gave us the dog example. But since we're a wine club, we could talk about like maybe different types of wine, right? They all kind of look the same.
Red, white.
Yeah, they're red, white, but they're in a bottle with a cork, you know? So like we know
Some is
they're
what
all
it's called.
wine.
Some
sharing-
have like a fizzy, you know, like a bubbly, like a champagne almost.
Yeah, but they're all sharing the same pretty much common feature of being like in that bottle with the cork. So we could maybe put those in feature stimulus class. Okay. What about arbitrary stimulus class? So this is the one where they do not resemble each other, but they evoke the same response.
I guess type of vehicle would be arbitrary, right? Like different, like a bus, a car, an airplane, a boat, all are, wouldn't that be arbitrary?
Yeah, that's good. So I can use all of those different types of vehicles to get me to the place. So they're all going to evoke the same response. I'm going to get on them and they're going to take me somewhere. But they're all not resembling each other. That's a good one. And then here it's telling us about the vowels, A, E, I, O, U, and sometimes Y. They don't look alike in any way, but we know that all of those are grouped as vowels. Okay. So here it's just giving us a nice little visual about, I guess, different stimulus classes. So this one's the arbitrary, right? It's giving us different examples of half. So they all mean half. And when the kids are learning math, they're learning all of the different types of ways to express a half. But all of those will get you reinforcement because that's the correct answer or something like that. So you just always want to look, if they're talking about stimuli, always look at the antecedent, because that's where your stimuli is. I don't know if that helps anybody. I know a lot of people really get those questions mixed up where it's like stimulus generalization and response generalization. So this might help you to kind of distinguish those type of questions. Okay. And then the way that I remembered those type of questions was like, you guys know LRFFC? When you're teaching them, it's like a more advanced level program. So once they've got all of the different verbal operands, then you start teaching them like LRFFC, which is like feature function class. So it's putting all of those things into different groups based off of their feature or based off of their function or based off of their class. And so it really helped me to kind of break down questions like that as well. Okay, so now it's going to go into prompts. So this is always fun. I love talking about prompting. Okay, so we're going to talk about using response and stimulus prompts. So that's also a thing that we struggle with in the exam, right? Is like distinguishing between, is this a response prompt or is this a stimulus prompt? So this chapter is probably really helpful to review for those of us who struggle with those type of questions. So prompts are supplementary antecedent stimuli. So we know that prompts always occur in the A part of our ABC, used to occasion a correct response in the presence of natural SD, and will eventually control the behavior. Applied behavior analysts give response and stimulus prompts before or during performance of a behavior. Okay, so definition of response prompt: operate directly on the response to cue a correct response. The three major forms of response prompts are verbal instruction, modeling, and physical guidance. Stimulus prompts operate directly on the antecedent task stimuli to cue a correct response in conjunction with the critical SD. Does anybody have any examples or maybe any like mock questions that you have encountered where they gave you stimulus prompt or response prompt? Okay, so let's go into verbal instruction. So we use functionally appropriate verbal instructions as supplementary response prompts. Verbal response prompts occur frequently in almost all training contexts in the form of vocal verbal instruction. So it's going to be oral, telling, and non-vocal verbal instruction. Written words, manual signs, and pictures. So that's also kind of an important thing to note, is that it can be spoken and it can also be presented visually. And so those are going to be your verbal instructions. And those are response prompts. And just a little side note that I always tell people, especially for my clients. I read this somewhere and I don't know where, in like an article or something. When you're teaching a new behavior, like an adaptive skill, something that you eventually want them to learn on their own or to be able to do independently, like hand washing, toothbrushing, all of those like task analysis type things, you want to do your best to avoid verbal, like spoken verbal prompts. Does anybody know why? Yes, no?
They,
Go ahead.
they could become prompt dependent on that stimulus, on that response prompt. And then, yeah.
Yeah, perfect. So verbal prompts. Go ahead.
I want to add also that verbal prompt is hard to fade when we're trying to fade the prompt, because
Perfect.
as she say, they all depend on the verbal prompt, but the verbal prompt is the hardest prompt to fade.
Yes, perfect. That's exactly, you guys said exactly what I wanted you to say. So verbal prompts are the hardest to fade, and they become prompt dependent on that verbal instruction. And so they are no longer using their own little brain to come up with what's going to come next, because they know, like, because you're always telling them, turn on water, hands underwater, like, so you're giving them all the steps, so they never really have to think about it themselves. And so yes, they'll become prompt dependent on that. So this is like my favorite thing to teach in parent training, because as a parent, you do that a lot, and you don't even realize it. And so I teach them that if this is a skill that you eventually want them to have on their own, then you're going to do your best to avoid verbal prompting and try like gesturing, modeling, other ways to get them to kind of think about it themselves. I don't know if it would be the same for like pictures. I don't think so. I don't know. I don't know if the picture prompts are hard to fade. I feel like eventually they start to get it on their own. I know, like for little babies, I do use a song. I use songs for everything. I have a bunch of songs for washing hands. So in the beginning, I teach them this song. And after a while, I don't have to sing the song to them anymore. They sing it on their own. And so they like are singing the steps to themselves. So that could be something. But yes, so verbal prompts.
Selena, I'm the same way. I'm a song person. For everything, I have like a kind of song for the kid that I work, and they always come like singing the song alone, and then I don't have to even go to the task analysis steps because they already know by the song. So
Yeah.
I thought like I was the little one, the little nuts, but now I feel better.
No, yeah, I'm really crazy like that as well. So like everybody loves whenever I take clients, because they love to watch me like interact with them, because I have a song for everything. I'll sing everything, even though I'm not a good singer. I just feel like that's the best way to remember things. Okay, so verbal prompting, and then you have, let's see, does it give us anything else important in verbal prompting? Okay. And then also know that there is indirect verbal prompts. Do you guys know what indirect verbals are? So indirect verbal prompts are going to be like, you're not giving them the answer, but you're maybe giving them some type of hints that will get them to the answer.
Type of clue or some type of, yeah, okay.
Yeah, so I'm trying to think of like an example. It would be like, what comes next? Or
Yeah.
something like that.
What is missing? Something like that.
Yeah, so I'm not necessarily giving them the answer, but I'm using those indirect verbals to get them there. And
Could it also, could it also be like if they're trying to identify an object maybe, or point to something or find something, if you were to be like, oh, and like kind of change, like kind of say a sound as they got closer to whatever it was that you were looking for them to find?
Yeah, I guess so. Like kind of changing your, like pairing like a certain sound with the correct response. I would have to think about that, but yes, maybe so. But indirect verbals are really, they're nicer than actually just giving them the answer. So you're just using like some type of leading instruction to get them there. So yeah, I guess the sound can be like a leading instruction that gets them there. Okay, activity schedules, modeling. Okay, so modeling is going to be us demonstrating or modeling the desired behavior as a response prompt. So we can just stick to washing hands since we're already on it. You can possibly be in the sink next to them and be showing them what the next step is, because remember, I have to zip because I'm doing a TA, so I have to zip and figure out different ways to get them there. So you might gesture, but we're not there right now. So model, I'm going to be next to him in the sink, and I'm going to be showing him quietly what comes next. So modeling the desired behavior. This one can be an effective prompt, especially for learners who have learned some of the component behaviors required for the imitation. Oh yeah, so make sure they have the prerequisite skills, which is being able to imitate. So you're not going to want to use model prompts for a client that doesn't imitate. That would be silly. Modeling is easy, practical, and successful way for a coach to show a player an appropriate form of shooting a basket through a hoop when the player already can hold the ball, raise it over his head, and push the ball away from his body. I'm a visual person. Like, I need to see it done first in order for me to understand it. So as a BCBA, it's your responsibility to teach the way that you want the behavior, the RBTs, how you want them to run the program. And a lot of times you just writing it down and your very detailed description is not enough. So you want to make sure that you are using BST, behavior skills training, right? Where you are modeling the desired behavior and this is, okay, so sometimes like I'll get an RBT where it's like, I'm like trying to walk them through it, tell them, and I'm like constantly like giving them like verbal prompt, like do this and don't do this and do this and I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna run your session for 1 hour. It gets real, like I'm like, you need to see it done, and then that way you can do it too. So I'll do that sometimes where I'm like, okay, I'm gonna go supervise you today, and I'm gonna run the session. You're gonna collect data. So that's like a me thing. That's kind of how I teach things, especially for those people who are really struggling. But it is part of your requirements as a BCBA to use BST, and within BST there is modeling. So you can't just write out an instruction and tell them to do it that way. You actually have to model the behavior that you want them to exhibit. So we use ABA not only on our learners, but also on our supervisees, I guess, your RBTs, whoever you're supervising, in order to coach them on the way that you want them to perform the intervention that you are introducing. Teachers modeling how to tie shoes. So that would be a good one. Attending skills are important. Wow, a lot of people today, you guys. Okay, attending skills are important. Yes, so they have to have attending as a prerequisite for a model response prompt. Because if they're not even looking at you, then there's no use in you giving them a model response, because they don't have that prerequisite skill of attending. So being very careful that they have the skills in their repertoire for the prompt that you're providing. Isn't this so fun, guys? Okay, we're running out of time. Physical guidance and stimulus prompt. Those would be the last two that we go over. Okay, so physical guidance is a response prompt applied most often with young children, learners with severe disabilities, and older adults experiencing physical limitations. Using physical guidance, the teacher partially guides the student's movements or physically guides the student throughout the entire movement of the response. Okay, so physical guidance. You will, like they said here, use it most with your young learners. So I know, like with my babies, they're like 2 years old and they're just coming into ABA for the first time. They don't have a lot of the prerequisite skills. So a lot of times you go into it with the like errorless. So you go first to physical guidance and show them the way that you want them to perform the behavior.
Hand over hand.
Yes, hand over hand or full physical. And I put that in the target. So it'll be like signing more with full physical prompt. And so whenever they actually do it alongside the therapist, so the therapist will say, oh, do you want more? And then really quickly go and show them more, good job, and then give them more of whatever it is. That would be considered correct. And so if they maybe ran away or went into a maladaptive behavior, then it would be considered incorrect. But based off of the way that I wrote the program, physical guidance is included within most of their imitation targets because they don't have that imitation skill. So that's for your babies or severe disabilities or people experiencing physical limitation. But for other people that can do things on their own, this is always going to be your last resort, right? Physical guidance is going to be the most intrusive. And so you always want to ensure your client's dignity when you are choosing what prompts to use. And one thing that I tell people is, like, for my older kids, like my 11, 13-year-olds, you do not need to be physically prompting them. They know how to do it. And so physical guidance for me, for the older kids, is like a big no. Like, you got to figure out a different way to get them to do it, so that we could preserve their dignity, because you don't need to be physically guiding an older client that's been in ABA for 10 years or something like that. So just keeping those things in mind. Okay, physical guidance, stimulus prompts. And making sure that you're fading your prompts, right? So I am using full physical for them to do more, but then the next step when they master the full physical is going to be partial. So maybe they're just gonna tap the little elbows and then he goes to more on his own. And so once he masters that, then I open the next one. I like to integrate my prompts within my targets, because sometimes it's hard leaving it up to the therapist to fade prompts. So I just fade them myself. Other people, maybe you have a really good RBT and they can fade prompts on their own. But I like to put them within my targets so that I see like the improvement, and then we go to our next prompt. So it just depends on your learner. I don't do that for everybody, just the ones who might be like really fresh new learners. Okay, so I guess we could stop there with the video. So today we went through teaching conditional discrimination, teaching concepts, and using response and stimulus prompts. So for next time, we'll go into factors affecting the development of stimulus control.